Today I'm going to be giving a talk that's is very apropos. So the discussion that ended Dr. Paul Mason's talk on concussion sort of led right into this, which is where if you have a patient that has an athlete who has had a concussion, it could be beneficial to be in a state of ketosis at the time of concussion, and that could have neuroprotective effects. But is that really feasible for an athlete, a recreational athlete or a top athlete, to be in ketosis during that experience? Is that going to hurt or hinder their athletic performance? So I'm going to go through some of the data for that. I'm going to give some arguments about why it is beneficial not only to be a ketogenic athlete, but also a ketogenic carnivore athlete. There's some benefits on top of that as well. Some of these things, Dr. Paul Mason has an excellent talk talking about a lot of the science and studies that go into the ketogenic athlete. And I'm going to touch on some of those here and then add a few as well. So we're going to go over 3 key benefits to being a ketogenic carnivore athlete. We're going to talk about the growing list of carnivore athletes because there are quite a number of top-tier international athletes that are coming to a ketogenic carnivore diet and showing vast improvements in their performance. And then my own experience, because when my professor said plants are trying to kill you, and that he didn't eat plants, he didn't eat salads, he didn't eat vegetables, he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables. That stuck with me, and I was an athlete at the time. I was played at the university level and at the premiership level in the U.S. and Canada, and then professionally in England. And I can tell you, there was a massive, massive difference in my performance. So one of the main benefits is you actually tap into a much better, more useful, and much more wealthy store of energy when you're in a ketogenic state. To store glycogen, you have your liver and your muscles, but you can only store about 10,000 kilojoules, which is about 2,400 kilocalories of energy. So it's a decent amount of energy, but that's by no means our main energy store. In fact, it's our fat. And our fat in a 65 kilo athlete with only 6% body fat, so an elite level body fat percentage, in just those 6% body fat has nearly 36,000 kilocalories of energy available to them. So this is why you're seeing people run ultra marathons completely fasted. Alex McDonald is an athlete actually he's just a recreational athlete in Sydney, and he ran 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted, didn't eat the entire week, just to prove the point that you didn't actually need to suck down a bunch of carbs, because the energy that you use for your exercise today doesn't come from the food you ate this morning or yesterday. It comes from the meal you had 2 weeks ago, and it's stored in your fat, and then you use that fat, but only when you're ketogenic. If you're not in a ketogenic state, you cannot access your fat stores, because once insulin gets up to a certain point, your fat cells are locked. You cannot get energy out of those fat stores if your insulin is too high. So you want to get that down low, then you tap into this nearly bottomless amount of energy that's available. So for carb athletes, they're going through this period where they bonk. It used to be called hitting the wall. When I was a kid, it was called hitting the wall. And now we have all these gels and these powders and sugary drinks and things like that so that people can keep up their energy and maintain their glucose. But what I was told when I was a kid was that you have to keep pushing, and eventually if you push through, you'll break through the wall and you're gonna need your second wind, and then you can just go forever. And when you're in a ketogenic state, that is your second wind. You're always in your second wind because you're tapped into your fat stores. You're not just running on glycogen, you're not just running on glucose, you're running on ketones, and that's very important. So as a ketogenic athlete, you don't bonk, you don't run out of energy, you don't have to keep sucking down these sugar gels and having these ups and these downs and these highs and these lows. And that's also important too, because we're going to talk also about longevity as an athlete and as a person. If you are eating a certain way, you're taking in a lot of heavy carbohydrates for your athletic performance, that's going to have a metabolic toll as well. And a lot of the athletes that Professor Noakes and others have studied, when they have these comparative analysis with ketogenic athletes and carb-fueled athletes, they may have similar performances on game day, But the carb-fueled athletes, some of them were pre-diabetic. They were getting metabolic syndrome. These were elite athletes. And these people are exercising a lot and they're pre-diabetic. So obviously that's not sustainable for an athlete as well. So, well, why are we told this, that carbohydrates are the best fuel for athletes? Well, it's predicated on a few different things, but one of them is this idea that that you can only, up to a certain point of percentage of VO2 max, you're burning fat, and then past that, you have to have carbs. So if you want to be an elite athlete where you're really pushing yourself and really extending yourself, then you have to have carbohydrates because you'll only run on carbohydrates. And so this was emphasized in this quote here by Burke and Hawley. It says, nobody is awarded an Olympic gold medal for the most interesting metabolism, which is true. But I would actually refer to that metabolism, the carbohydrate metabolism, as the interesting anomaly, because the vast majority of animals on Earth, including humans in the wild, are in a ketogenic state. That is the natural state of most animals. That's the natural metabolic state of humans when we're in the wild eating our natural diet. We've looked at lions, we've looked at wolves, they're all in ketosis. Even if you look at cows and gorillas, they tend to be in ketosis as well. And that's because they aren't running on carbohydrates. Even though they eat fibrous plants, which are strings of glucose, they don't break those down. No vertebrate animal can break down cellulose. It's the bacteria in their gut that ferment and eat the fiber, and as a byproduct, excrete fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated, and then those bacteria die off and they're absorbed as protein. So a gorilla is eating leaves and a cow is eating grass, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein, just like a lion, just like a wolf, just like we're supposed to. And so they're all going to be in that ketogenic so-called starvation state, but they're not. That's a normal metabolic state. So I would actually say to Burke and Hawley that their metabolism is the unique, strange metabolism. So this sort of details some of this. So there's some of these studies that showed, and this was mentioned in the previous talk by Dr. Paul Mason, that some of the performance of the ketogenic athletes, while they were still going through fat oxidation, they were running on fat, they didn't actually have the same performance, but that has to do with largely with being fat adapted. And so this study, the Supernovas trial, didn't actually account for that. They only had these people going for 2-3 weeks. And so they weren't fully fat adapted. They weren't being adequately given electrolytes or given a very small amount of electrolytes. And so this was very poor for a number of different reasons. And there are other studies that did have ketogenically adapted athletes that had far, far greater performance. So it's not just about mobilizing the energy, the fat, the ketones. It's about how you use them. And that makes a big difference. So we looked at some other trials. We looked at Volek and Finney did a study called FASTER in 2016. And so that idea of only burning fat up to 60% VO2 max is sort of undone here, because they found that that's only applicable to carbohydrate-fueled athletes. And so it's not the case in ketogenic athletes, especially when they've been fat adapted. And these people were, it said 6 months there, but it's actually 9 months. They were fat adapted for at least 9 months, average of 20 months. And these were elite athletes, ultramarathoners, Ironman competition athletes. And they had been chosen themselves to go on a ketogenic diet, and they'd been on that for a number of years on average. In the low carb group, you can actually see that they had fat oxidation well past, that's a red line there, well past the high carb diet, over 80% VO2 max. There's still the large majority of their energy is coming from fat oxidation. So it's very different. So if you're eating a whole bunch of carbs, your insulin is high and you can't run on fat properly, then sure, you need to keep eating carbs. But if you have gotten away from that, then you actually had a huge advantage. So the keto athletes had a carbohydrate sparing effect. The vast majority of the energy was in fat. And the good thing is as we'll see in this trial, you make glucose, you make glycogen. So even the amount of carbohydrates that you do use, you don't need to take those in exogenously. And in fact, if you do take those in exogenously, then you're going to go down that blue path, and you're actually going to really curtail your energy mobilization. So this was the study that was mentioned in the last talk, which was where they took muscle biopsies. So they took muscle biopsies before, after, and then 3 hours after their exercise tests. And they found that the ketogenic athletes had essentially the same muscle glycogen levels as the carbohydrate athletes. And the carbohydrate athletes, for the 3-hour test, they were taking down sugary gels and different sorts of sugar drinks and things like that, whereas the fat-adapted athletes that had a bit of fat or something like that, they did not take in carbohydrates. And so it was their body replenishing the glycogen, not the carbohydrates that they were eating. This is a study from Professor Tim Noakes down in South Africa. And this was an interesting trial because he took high-carb athletes and low-carb athletes, he switched them around. So it was a crossover study, it was a randomized crossover study where they looked at the performance of recreational athletes, weekend warriors sort of things, where they tried to push them to the maximum limits, where they tried to do things. That was the trial where they had 5 successive 800-meter runs. And so you're running really, really hard, and you're doing this again and again and again, and they're trying to wear out and get rid of all available glycogen and see what happens. Well, the fact is that the keto athletes did not lose any performance. And then they did adapt them for 6 weeks, so about 42 days. And then they competed with, in the different trials that they had. Then they had a 2-week washout period where they ate whatever they wanted to, and then they switched. And so the carb athletes became the keto athletes and vice versa, and then they keto adapted them for another 42 days, and they found that there was no drop in their performance. So the idea that you have to have carbohydrates or you will hurt your performance is simply not the case. And once you get away from carbohydrates, even before we look at any sort of advantages you have once you're very keto adapted in months and years after you're keto adapted, which I would argue is the case, you are already at a massive, massive, massive benefit as an athlete just because you're tapped into your fat stores. You're tapped into 15 times the amount of energy from your fat stores than you have available in your glycogen for a 65 kilo person at only 6% body fat. And if you have more than that, then you have even more energy available to you. So the low-carb group was still burning fat up to 90% VO2 max, and the high-carb group was, no surprise, running primarily on carbohydrates. The low-carb group had better metabolic flexibility. Again, this is looking at the carbohydrate athletes are taking a lot of carbohydrates. It's actually causing metabolic issues and forcing people into prediabetes. So obviously, that is not a sustainable model as an athlete if you want to continue to be an athlete. Professor Noakes also has a theory that the reason that athletes bonk and they run out of energy is not because they're running out of glycogen, but actually their blood sugar dips a bit. And so this is not getting enough blood sugar to the brain. The brain feels the effects of that. That's also very much benefited by being in a state of ketosis because you're much better able to maintain your blood sugar level, but also your brain runs on ketones and primarily runs on ketones for about 2/3 of your brain. It preferentially runs on ketones. So when you have ketones available, and even if you have an abundance of glucose, those parts of your brain will only run on the ketones. It's only when those ketones levels start dropping that you start filling in the gaps with blood sugar. I learned that in biochemistry 23 years ago, and yet we forget this somehow. So let's look at actual performance when you have somebody keto adapted long-term with high-level athletes. So McSweeney in 2018 actually showed in high-performance elite-level athletes that were self-selected into a high-carb group and low-carb group for 12 weeks. So that's a good amount of fat adaptation. You could go longer, but some studies have shown that after about 12 weeks on a ketogenic diet, you have roughly 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. So right there is a massive benefit in energy production. So the athletes in the keto group outperformed the high carb group. They had 3 different tests, and 2 of them came to statistical significance. 1 did not. However, in the short 6-second sprints, that did come to statistical significance. So they were able to outperform their high carbohydrate compatriots, and they also improved their body composition. They, on average, lost about 6 kilos, and the high carb group lost less than 1 kilo. And so this shows the benefits of that upregulation of these of being keto adapted. So you can make all the ketones. I mean, this is something that we notice when people first go on a ketogenic diet, carnivore or otherwise, is that their ketones can go up very, very high. They may even notice their ketones in their urine. That means their body's not using it. If it's just being peed out, right? It's wasted. But over time, then the urine levels of ketones tend to go away, and you can measure this, and your blood levels of ketones tend to go down. Is that because you're making less ketones? No, it's because your body's utilizing them and using them properly. You can measure this with uric acid levels. Uric acid competes for elimination in the kidneys with ketones. And so if you're spilling out more ketones in your urine, that's going to offset the uric acid. And so your serum levels of uric acid can go up slightly, and studies have tracked this, that it can actually go as long as 4 months and still be elevated. So while it's coming down, you still have slightly elevated levels of uric acid for some people. They don't get gout, by the way. And that's another thing people don't realize. There are 5 different causes of gout. Up until the early 2000s, they were all called gout. Now it's called pseudo-gout, and then gout is called the uric acid crystals. You have no idea. They all present exactly the same. They have the exact same symptoms. The only way to tell is by sticking a big needle into this inflamed, nasty, painful joint, which no doctor is going to do unless they want to get sued, and then you send that off to a lab to see what kind of crystals are in there. Sometimes it's uric acid crystals. Other times it's oxalate crystals. That's another cause of pseudo-gout, which is a plant toxin, which we'll get to. So another reason why this is good is because it can promote muscle growth and fat loss, which is obviously beneficial to an athlete. I was speaking to someone in the break, and it was very, very, very timely, so I added it in, and she said that her nutritionist relative or dietitian relative said that, well, carnivore only helps because it eliminates the junk. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, yeah, but that's like saying that the only reason you're not poisoned is because you stopped eating poison. And it's like, well, yeah, that's entirely the point. And plants are also junk. That's the problem too. But that is a major that is a major thing. I mean, the things we're putting into our body directly cause harm, and we know this from a junk food perspective, from a high carbohydrate perspective. You know, if you're eating sugar in the form of fruit, you get a very different glucose and insulin spike as you do if you're eating refined sugar of the same grammage. So it affects your body differently, but there are other things in this world that cause harm. It's not just carbohydrates or processed carbohydrates or even seed oils, even though those are very, very harmful things. There are natural ways that plants defend themselves. And some of these can be thought of as anti-nutrients, so they'll block out the absorption of certain nutrients. We saw that example with different foods such as black beans and corn blocked out the zinc absorption in oysters. But there's so many more. There's things like phytic acid, there's oxalates, there's tannins, and lectins. These things can bind and denature the different nutrients, that vitamins and minerals that we're trying to bring in, and stop us from being able to absorb them properly. So that's very important. A thing called protease inhibitors that are very common in things such as wheat and soy, which will block protease, which is our enzyme from our pancreas that breaks down proteins and amino acids and allows us to absorb them properly. And so when you block protease, then we can't break down these proteins, we can't absorb them, and they go out. They're not bioavailable, we won't absorb them. So it doesn't matter about how many grams of protein go in your mouth, it matters how many get in your body. That's very important. It doesn't matter how many milligrams of zinc go in your mouth. It matters about what gets in your body, and it's very important. That's one of the ways that plants defend themselves, is by making themselves less nutritious, by not being bioavailable, like strings of glucose in the form of cellulose. We cannot break those bonds. We cannot access that glucose. And so all those calories that you would see in a fireplace when you burn wood, there's heat escaping that does not translate into energy in your body. And the same thing goes for many other nutrients, not just glucose, but also they make other things less bioavailable and less nutritious as well. And so this is something that can cause quite a lot of malnutrition. And this is the argument, is that it's not just, well, you're eliminating junk food and that's what makes a carnivore diet better. You're also adding in very nutritious things, and you're not nutritionally deficient anymore, because most people are nutritionally deficient. There's a couple good examples of this in veterinary medicine, livestock medicine, where they have things called different diseases like big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. These are all diseases, but they've actually figured out that they come from the animal eating a plant that they're not designed to eat, and they're actually getting poisoned by the toxins in those plants. And that's very important, because then you can say, okay, well, that's what this cow has. We need to get them out of this pasture. We need to get them different forage, all these sorts of things, and maybe give them some medicine to get them through it. The reason that they figured that out for cows, we haven't figured that out for humans yet, is that cows are actually worth something. Humans are inherently worthless, right? So, because we're selling cows, we're using them, and they're a commodity. And so when your cow gets sick or it dies and its babies are dying, people are losing money. And so they need to figure out what the hell is going on. When people get sick, they go to the hospital, they spend money. So that's the incentive. They're actually not looking to keep us well. I'm not saying they're trying to make us sick, but I'm saying they're not incentivized to keep us well anyway, but they are incentivized to keep livestock well. Another illustration of this, which I find very interesting, and I fire this out at different conferences like this to see if there's any sort of neurologist or anybody else who treats this, maybe the pediatricians in the room that may see these sorts of things. There's very clear signs of disease in livestock as well. Now, we know a lot of these sort of deficiencies, pellagra and beriberi, scurvy, these sorts of things. We have a deficiency of a specific vitamin, but we didn't always know that they were from deficiencies. Pellagra killed hundreds of thousands of people in America before they figured out that it was a niacin deficiency. And right now we're going through a lot of diseases that I think come from toxicities, but also malnutrition. Very interesting crossover from the animal world is muscular dystrophy. Cows have muscular dystrophy, and apparently it's the exact same presentation as human muscular dystrophy, but they figured it out. It's from a selenium deficiency. So it's actually called nutritional muscular dystrophy. Has anyone ever asked if our children with muscular dystrophy have a nutritional deficiency, selenium or otherwise? I don't know. I would hope that people listening to this will start asking that question. So these are some of the great things about going carnivore on top of just being ketogenic, is because you eliminate all these sorts of things. You eliminate these toxins, you eliminate these anti-nutrients, and you're just giving yourself more bioavailable food. The lectins and things like that, these are very diverse set of molecules, but they can damage your gut lining, like wheat germ agglutinin can cause leaky gut. Now you're allowing more of these toxins to get in your body. You're allowing bacteria to get in your body where it's not supposed to be. Your body has to attack these things and make antibodies towards them. That's actually a theory on autoimmunity, is that you get these lectins in the body and your body's making antibodies towards these lectins and maybe other bacteria that are getting in your body through leaky gut, and then that is getting a cross-reactivity with your body. Or another theory is that these lectins are actually, because they have a carbohydrate component, they can bind onto the different carbohydrate surface molecules with a carbohydrate component in your body, and so they can attach on to different organs inside your body once it gets into your bloodstream, and that your body is making antibody towards that complex. It actually is trying to defend you and protect you, but you're getting hit in the crossfire. So this is a theory of autoimmunity, and either way, when I put patients on a purely carnivorous diet, just beef, lamb, and water, and nothing else, we notice their antibodies going down. And eventually, for the ones that you can test, like Hashimoto's, they do tend to go down to trace, and people's symptoms of autoimmunity go away. And I have patients that were in wheelchairs with multiple sclerosis, and they are now symptom-free, and on MRI, they have had a 50% reduction in their their lesions. And I'm putting together a case series to publish that, because that's pretty unheard of. And in fact, one patient of mine fired her neurologist because she went into him and he was very, very critical on her about trying this sort of dietary approach, said that she was going to kill herself and it was really reckless what she was doing with her health. And but she refused to listen to him. She ended up going on a carnivore diet. She came off all her autoimmune medications, and 6-8 months down the road, she had an MRI and indeed had 50% reduction in her lesions. And her neurologist said, "I can't explain this. I don't know what's going on. I've never seen this." I said, "Well, do you think it might be the diet?" I said, "Absolutely not. Couldn't possibly be." So, so she stopped seeing him, and I think that's fair. So you're getting rid of these things. And yes, it is, well, you're just not eating junk. Yes, there's more junk than we realize, but you're also getting in proper nutrition, which you have to have, especially if you're an elite level athlete. The ketogenic carnivore diets, or just ketogenic diet in general, can help weight regulation without having to count calories, track macros. It's very satiating. Your body, just like every other animal on Earth, the human animal seems to be able to tell exactly how many macros and micros we need just by eating, and our satiety signals, as long as we're eating the right thing. Carbohydrates raise insulin, that blocks leptin. Leptin is a satiety hormone, and we drop our blood sugar. We become hungry again. We have this pattern of overeating, just like that pediatric case where the young girl was very overweight, eating a lot of sort of processed garbage, and was hungry all the time. She was constantly hungry all the time. And that's why it's these hormonal mechanisms. And when you're not eating those sorts of things, and lectins actually can bind, sometimes studies have shown that certain lectins can bind 5 times more tightly to insulin receptors than insulin does. And so you can have a similar sort of effect, and you can trigger an overeating phenomenon there as well. So you get rid of all that, and now your body knows how much leptin it has, how much fat stores it has, and you don't tend to drop your blood sugar. You have ketones available, so you're not going to overeat because your body's starving for energy. So the other thing is that our stomachs have receptors that track up the vagus nerve to the brain and actually track macros and micros. So this is why people notice the phenomenon that when you start eating fatty steak or something like that, it tastes amazing at first, but then you start eating your way through it, it tastes less good and less good until finally it doesn't taste good at all. And they have a bite and it's the same piece of meat cooked at the same time in the same conditions. It's still warm, and it doesn't taste good anymore. It tastes sort of bland. And they think, oof, I don't really want to eat this anymore. That's your body naturally telling you you don't need this anymore, because your stomach has told your brain that you're good. Every single animal on Earth can auto-regulate. You don't see animals with weight problems. You don't see badgers running around, obese badgers running around like, oh, it's just gotta, has no self-control, So it's just like, nature should work out. And so if we're eating our natural diet, we should see this phenomena, and that's exactly what we see. So you have a big benefit of that. And studies have actually shown that when you're in a ketogenic state, you actually burn more carbs. You increase your basal metabolic rate by 350 kilocalories. So you actually burn more calories. Your body's using more calories. And weight control and weight management is much easier. I noticed this as well when I was an athlete. I could stay in good shape because I was just running all the time, working out all the time. As soon as we had a bit of a break in the off season or something like that, you just see the fluff starting, and it was a bit surprising. But that was the thing that we're told. We're just fighting against entropy. Our body just wants to break down and be fat and slobbish. I mean, I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, why are we the only animal that's not fit all the time? Why are these animals all just very powerful and lean? Why are we the only squishy animal on Earth, and we just can't maintain our own body composition? The argument is that, well, they're in the wild and they're running around all the time. But that doesn't explain animals in the zoo. Animals in the zoo live in a box a quarter of the size of this room their entire life. That's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle. And yet I've never seen a fat zebra or a fat giraffe or a fat lion unless they're being fed something that they're not supposed to eat. And you'll see those exact same diseases in those animals. They get human diseases. What the hell is a human disease? Diabetes, cancer, autoimmunity, arthritis, obesity, osteoporosis, things like that. These are not found naturally in the animal kingdom. So this keeps athletes for longer. There are several different mechanisms. I'll touch on a few. The simple fact of energy production in the body through the Krebs cycle, you go through glucose, you use 4 NAD plus to get 2 acetyl-CoAs. Ketones, you actually only use 1. So your ratio of NAD plus NADH is actually improved. And this has been shown to reduce oxidative stress and improve in a number of different ways, especially in it's protective to brain health as well. Ketones like beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the main ketone body that's made when we're in ketosis, blocks NLRP3 inflammasome. And so this directly reduces inflammation throughout the body. And when you're in a high stress state, you're working out all the time, you have inflammation building up, this is a very good thing. Also, you're not bringing in extra inflammatory factors like from the different things that you're eating. So it's much cleaner and your body is able to get rid of and deal with inflammation much better. You're not going to be building up that sort of pressure on your body. Ketogenic diets enable autophagy. Autophagy is something we speak about when we have to fast for 5 days. People talk about how every quarter they would fast for 5 days just to let their body go through autophagy. Well, the interesting thing is that just having low insulin levels will also let you go through autophagy, because it's not the lack of food and starving yourself that triggers autophagy. It's just the lack of insulin blocking autophagy. We've spoken a lot about the benefits of being on a low carbohydrate diet, of lowering insulin. The reason that is because insulin doesn't just affect energy mobilization and energy going into your cells. That's probably one of the least parts of what it does. Insulin affects over 100 different mechanisms in your body. And so when you elevate that with a high carbohydrate diet, you are elevating that insulin, and now it's out of balance for all these different mechanisms, including autophagy. So now that stops autophagy. You can't replace your old damaged precancerous cells. You're not going to replace out your old damaged mitochondria and other organelles, and they're just going to continue to break down and degrade, and you're going to get metabolic dysfunction and disease. When this is why I mentioned earlier, when you're on a ketogenic diet for 3 months or so, you end up having 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective because you go through something called mitophagy as well, and mitogenesis. So you're turning over the old damaged mitochondria, and you're actually regenerating more of them as a result of that. So this is the key point, because people say, well, just not eating is what you have to do. You're starving yourself, and your body's looking around for resources to try to get some of these resources and use them for energy around your body. Well, the problem with that is that when you start breaking down your mitochondria, they don't just get used by in somewhere else. They get turned into more mitochondria. It's actually an energy dependent mechanism. And so now you're making more mitochondria as well. So even without eating, your body is doing this. And so this is just a normal housekeeping process that your body should be going through at all times, as long as your insulin is low, and it will be if you're on a low carb diet. So the ketogenic state allows autophagy and increases brown cell fat and cell activation and growth hormone, testosterone, etc. And that's true. So high insulin, one of the many things that insulin does is block the action of growth hormones. So you get lower IGF-1, and you get less growth hormone action. I've seen in my ketogenic carnivore athletes and others, and just my normal patients, the testosterone levels increased dramatically. I had a 72-year-old gentleman who tripled his testosterone levels and in a matter of months by doing this, and felt obviously much better and all these other sorts of things. And this was without TRT. It wasn't giving him any sort of medication for this. And in different athletes, and we'll come to a couple of them, dramatically improved their testosterone as already an elite level athlete. And that's obviously going to have a huge benefit as well. Articular cartilage arthritis, this is something that has been shown on biopsy of people with arthritis to have heavily glycation end products, so AGEs, advanced glycation end products. They find these in abundance in damaged articular cartilage, and it doesn't say here on the slide, but also in degenerative discs. That was a study that I found very recently, and they found the same sort of AGEs and buildup of glycation and damage in the degenerative disc. So when we're looking at degenerative spines and things like that, this could be a very common mechanism for that. And then down there at the bottom is concussion. Obviously, from the talk we heard from Dr. Paul Mason today on concussions and how advantageous it is to be in ketosis at the point of concussion. This is obviously a huge advantage to any athlete going, especially a contact athlete. And just to reiterate for people, watching this on YouTube, the reason being is because you have a secondary damage that comes after the initial concussion and insult. And this can cause inflammation, oxidative stress. And when you're in ketosis, those elevated ketones block inflammation, like the NLRP3 inflammasomes, and it reduces that inflammation and damage. It also allows you to get energy into the brain to heal, help the brain heal and recover, and also just function normally. Because when you have that concussion, you can become, your brain can be less able to use glucose, and so you need ketones as an alternative as well. And if you're in ketosis at the time, you have all these mechanisms in place. Whereas if you try to go onto a ketogenic diet after the fact, it can take days and you can miss out. Okay, so to go through some of the athletes, this is a growing list. It's not a complete list because a lot of athletes are actually keeping this to themselves. They don't want everybody knowing this. This is a secret weapon. So some of these things are in say, like the NFL. So Nick Bosa, he's one of the top NFL defensive linemen for the 49ers. He's been on a ketogenic diet and talks about that openly. And then I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Puka Nacua from the LA Rams, he's a wide receiver, and he's full carnivore. And obviously ketogenic, as a carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet. This is a young man named Ryan Talbot who felt that he wasn't doing well, he didn't feel his best. He was already a scholarship athlete at a D1 school in America at Michigan State as a track athlete. He was a pole vaulter. And he just didn't feel very well. He went to the team doctor and said, hey, can we check me out? I don't feel great. Checked all his bloods, everything came back fine. And but he said, I don't feel fine. So obviously there's something wrong. And so he started looking around. He found a carnivore diet. He tried it himself. We were in communication. I helped him out with it in the early stages. And he had a bit of a 2-week sort of adjustment period to it. But he said after that, his performance just took off. And he actually switched to the decathlon mid-season when he went carnivore. And in his second decathlon ever, he won the Big Ten championship, set a school record, and then earned All-American honors that year. And now he's a 3-time All-American, and he won a bronze medal at the Pan Am Games representing the United States, and just missed out on going to the Olympics this year as well. I was carnivore the entire time, ketogenic carnivore the whole time. His testosterone, these are American numbers, so slightly different, but his testosterone level was 760 before he went carnivore. And his doctor said, oh, that's great. It's a great number. 1 year later, it was 1150. Big jump to the point that he got randomly selected for drug testing by the NCAA, but it came back clean. And so that was completely natural. That was his body doing that. And obviously, as an elite level athlete, if you nearly double your testosterone, increase it by 80%, and you're increasing all these other hormones and biomarkers as well as getting into a ketogenic state where you can run on your fat stores, you're obviously going to have a huge advantage. Decathlon is a grueling set of events. There are 10 events, obviously, decathlon, split up into 2 days. At the All-American trials, these are the best athletes in the world. These are people that are going to be competing for a spot on the Olympic team. And in America, at least, people have a good chance of winning gold at those Olympics. And so these are all the top shelf athletes. And he said that 4 or 5 of them at the All-American trials, 4 or 5 of them were not able to compete in the last few events because they were just so broken down and worn out. And he said that his last 2 events were always his best. He was setting PRs on the 1,500 meter run, which is the very last event at the Big Ten Championship and the All-American trials. He just gets better and better and better as he goes, which is a huge advantage because he's not running down. He's not having to take down sugary gels. His body's just working. And that's obviously a huge advantage to athletes. Tim Olson is a record-holding USA ultramarathoner, and he's a ketogenic athlete. And a lot of ultramarathoners and marathon runners, Ironman competitors, Tour de France athletes are coming to this. A lot of them are sponsored by carby stuff and Gatorades and things like that. So sometimes they have to keep it to themselves, but many people are being open about it. Such as Zach Bitter. Zach Bitter is a low-carb keto athlete. Sometimes when he's doing ultramarathon run, he at least at one time was the world record holder for the 100-mile, and he is pretty much keto carnivore while training, and then sometimes he'll just spike in some carbs while he's doing his competition. I don't think he needs them, but that makes him feel better, I guess. And then this is a gentleman named Bronco Billy, he's an ultramarathon runner, again, keto, low carb. Michael McKnight is another ultramarathoner. Marco Forcell is an ultramarathoner as well. So a lot of these guys are figuring out that you can actually do a lot better not eating carbohydrates. A lot of that comes from this guy, Dave Scott, who is just a very, very famous Ironman competitor. And when he was in his late 30s, he was having health issues, having metabolic issues, eating a lot of carbs and things like that for his competitions. He went ketogenic, low carb, ketogenic. He had massive recovery in his health, and at 40 years old, went back out, started competing again, and came in second in the Ironman competition. And he has said openly that if you want to do the Ironman, do not eat carbs. It is too grueling of a race. It is too grueling of a competition. If you use carbs, you will absolutely kill your performance, and you'll crash. You'll bonk. Epitomized by this guy is Pete Jacobs, who is the world champion in the Ironman. And he has been openly carnivore the whole time. So in an article that I read that interviewed him, they said, well, a lot of Ironman competitors are going ketogenic, but this guy's just eating meat. He's going even further, and he's going full carnivore. And he's talking about how beneficial that was to him. And again, world champion. A couple of MMA fighters, Wilton Ziegler. This is some female athletes as well are doing this, like Marina Moroz. She's a UFC fighter. She's full carnivore. Tyson Pedro was a UFC fighter and now is a professional boxer. He's full carnivore as well. And then Michael Chandler is in the UFC and he's carnivore. Chris Froome is a 4-time Tour de France winner. He's ketogenic. So this is one I get all the time. I said, well, if this were really the way to go, then you'd see professional athletes do it. Well, you are seeing professional athletes do it, and they're just not necessarily telling you about it, or you're not hearing about it. And one thing was that, well, no one in the Tour de France is doing it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So people winning the Tour de France are doing it. This is a funny thing. I mean, we are told different things. We're told things by the medical establishment. We propagate things as a medical establishment because we think it's right at the time. As William Osler said to the graduating class at Harvard Medical School in the 1930s, 100 years ago, he said, half of what you've learned here at Harvard is going to turn out to be wrong. But no one's going to tell you which half because no one knows. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. You're going to have to keep exploring and investigating and challenging what you were taught to push the body of human knowledge. And this is an ever-evolving game. It's not a science. It's the application of science. But this is very much a human endeavor. In the 1950s, I read how the Tour de France riders would actually smoke several cigarettes before the race because they were told that it was better, it would open up their lungs and was better for their cardiovascular health. So that's what we were telling people then. Now we're telling people to eat carbs and give them diabetes, right? A similar thing. And they were doing this in the 1950s. They were doing the Tour de France on dirt roads, on single-geared bikes. These were badasses. And they were smoking the whole time, right? Because they were being told that was good for them. This is a guy named Sean Sakanovsky. He's an ultra cyclist down in South Africa. He's full carnivore as well. He's been doing that for years. He works with the Noakes Foundation and is just doing more and more competitions showing that you don't even have to eat for these 200K or longer sort of bike rides at a very high output. Again, more female athletes. This is Mariska Strauss, who's again from South Africa. She's won basically every award you can for cycling in South Africa and elsewhere as well. And she's full carnivore also. Erling Haaland, this is an interesting guy because he went carnivore at 21. He was already premiership soccer player. Now he's one of the best in the world, and he's considered the best striker in the world. When he went carnivore, he's 21. This guy apparently still had open growth plates because he grew 5 inches after going carnivore. In the last year, he's grown nearly another inch. So he's just still growing. He's like 6'5" now. I didn't get that lucky. I started carnivore when I was about 21, and I didn't grow an inch. And so that was a bit robbed, but good for him. And so he's still growing and just doing exceptionally well. He's one of the top players in the world. This is a gentleman, Brandon Losiavo. He's a 2-time Olympic diver for the USA. He had a very interesting story because this helped his performance, but in other practical ways, this really changed his performance because he had very serious IBS. And so as a diver in a pool in little Speedos, that's a problem. And so he would have to take sometimes up to 20 Imodium a day during competitions just to keep this under control. And then he'd still be sort of rushing off to the bathroom and things like that. And horrible, stomach cramps and pains and things like that when you're having this tight tuck roll that you're doing when you're spinning and doing these flips. That's obviously very uncomfortable. So it was very difficult for him, and it's gone. All of that's gone. So it's not just the energy dynamics. It's not just accessing your fat stores. It's not just the nutritional side of things. There can be very serious, very real, practical benefits to eating properly as an athlete or otherwise. Blake Collier and Travis Smith, these are both professional golfers here in Australia. They're both carnivore, and they both found that they are feeling much better, much more mental clarity. Their brains are running on ketones now. They don't have a bunch of junk going through their system. They don't get tired halfway through their round. They're just going game after game after game, and they just feel fantastic. Professor Peter Bruckner worked with the Australian national cricket team and turned them from sort of middling team to very, very successful, being some of the top teams in the world. And so and by going on to ketogenic sort of diet approaches. And there's different sorts of individuals, obviously, that we could name, but a lot of those individuals on that team went. The All Blacks, there are several All Blacks playing right now. The Frank brothers are openly keto carnivore. Ofa is a prop playing for New Zealand now, and I've actually spoken to him. He said he's been carnivore for 8 years, and that most of them are. He said about 40% of the All Blacks are carnivore right now. They can't really talk about it though because they get sponsored by cereal companies, and so they're supposed to keep their mouth shut about it. But that's what they actually do. Sonny Bill Williams has been carnivore for a number of years, and like I said, others All Blacks. Quade Cooper and Pocock have been low carb for quite a long time. Martin Taupau, he's been doing carnivore, and that's energized or revitalized his career. Curtis Saronen, he's openly talked about his carnivore diet as well. And many other people playing, such as Josh Adokar, which goes by the Fox. He's one of the top rugby league players, and he's been openly vocal about his carnivore diet as well. So for me, I definitely noticed a massive difference in my performance as an athlete. I started this in my early 20s just because I just stopped eating plants and everything else came with plants. I was only eating fatty meat, and that's it. And I felt a lot better because of that. My performance improved quite dramatically. So when I changed, when I was probably 25, I was playing in England, and I sort of slipped off of it because I didn't realize how significant what I was doing was, and I started eating chicken that had a bit of crumbs on it, and I didn't think that was a big deal because, of course, dose makes the poison, and that's just a small amount of carbs and things like that. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but I definitely noticed a massive difference in my performance. And of course, that opened the door to allowing a little bit more and a little bit more and a little other things. I went back to basically eating what I grew up eating, which was a very clean, meat-heavy, omnivorous diet, and I would eat some vegetables and things like that because I was, supposed to, and so I would do that out of sufferance. But then, 13 years later, when I was 38 years old, I came back to this understanding that, well, actually, we've been eating meat for millions of years. It's certainly not bad for us, and there can be other things that can be harmful to us. And if we don't need them expressly, and they can cause harm, be it moderate harm or mild harm, it can still affect you. I thought, okay, well, let's just go back to doing what I was doing before, and I went and went back, just started eating fatty meat and water, stopped everything else, and that's me there. That's at 38 years old. That's not me at 22 or 24. And I went back and started playing top-level rugby in the U.S. for the MLR, for the Major League Rugby competition in Seattle, for the Seattle Seawolves. And I was back feeling like a 22-year-old. I could go as hard as I could. I could perform just as well as other people. I was just come back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh as a volunteer doctor there in the refugee camps, and I was not in shape. I was eating whatever was available in a refugee camp, which is generally not much, and I wasn't ketogenic or anything like that. And I came back to this, and I felt absolutely amazing. Within a couple of weeks, I felt like I was 22 again. I felt better at 38 on a carnivore diet than I did at 28 playing rugby, professional rugby, and at the top of my game, I thought. And I went back out and started playing rugby again, felt amazing. Within a couple of weeks after that, so I'd been eating this way and ketogenic again, probably for that point, 4 to 6 weeks, which is a good amount of time to be keto adapted. I felt so good, and I was able to perform so well that we did a fitness competition called the Modified Bleep Test. And I actually came in top 5 out of 92 players. 2 weeks into training, it was all diet. And so my friends that were running the team now said, like, "Oh, you've been keeping in shape. You've been putting in a lot of work." No, I have not. I'm completely out of shape. This is all diet. And I started getting very interested at that point. And then that's when I started digging into the research and the literature to see, okay, well, what is it? What is about this way of eating that's so beneficial? And I obviously found all the thousands of studies on the benefits of being on a ketogenic diet. And a carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet. And typically when you get rid of carbohydrates, you have to replace it with protein and fat. And where's that source coming from? Typically comes from meat. And so a lot of these things you can infer quite a lot of information on the benefits you'll get from going on a ketogenic carnivore diet as just a standard ketogenic diet. And it allows you, in your 40s to go and do this to your friends and just, knock the snot out of them, which is always fun. And I always sort of like that because that actually is a good friend of mine. And we grew up playing together, but he always hates me displaying that picture because it's, obviously because of what you can see there, but it's still one of my favorites. I was just like seeing that. So in summary, there's a clear advantage to being fully fat adapted as an athlete in a ketogenic state, massive advantage. And if you clean things up even more and get rid of the other sorts of things that could curtail your health and your performance, obviously that's going to improve your health and your longevity as an athlete as well. So this improves your body composition. It can also improve performance. And longevity is so important, which people don't take into full account. People, especially athletes, top athletes, they're willing to do anything to their body as long as they're able to keep playing professional sports, and they don't necessarily think about the long term. There's a lot of NFL players, linemen, and things like that. They're extremely metabolically unhealthy. They're carrying on a lot of extra weight, and they're just eating all this stuff. Maybe they're doing PEDs and taking steroids and things like that in order to improve and enhance their performance, and at the cost of their health. And they think, well, I have to do this because this is how I can perform. This is how I can compete. This is how I can keep my job and feed and provide for my family. And the reality is no, they don't. There's a much better way of doing this in all aspects, in all respects. So This is something that many of us have seen. I've certainly seen it in my personal life, so it made a lot of sense to me because I'd experienced that firsthand, and then looking at the data and the research and the science behind it, it made perfect sense. And then seeing these results in others is it's not really surprising to me. Do we need more research? Absolutely. You can always do with more research, but I think there's more than enough data available to start applying this to your patients and to yourself as an athlete and see what your results are. Understanding that you need a period of adaptation, and given that period of adaptation, you should get these biological and physiological benefits as well. And so it's definitely worth a try. It's not going to hurt you. We know that. Meat's not going to hurt you. But it could very well help you very much. And so just for the clinicians out there, don't be afraid of recommending this to your patients from a concussion point of view, and also from a performance point of view. Thank you very much.